As the urgency to address climate change intensifies, carbon removal is emerging as a critical component in achieving climate net zero targets. Unlike carbon avoidance or reduction strategies, carbon removal involves actively pulling carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it, whether through natural solutions like reforestation or advanced technologies like direct air capture. The carbon markets are rapidly evolving to integrate these carbon removal solutions, presenting new opportunities and challenges for businesses, investors, and policymakers alike. This panel, The Rising Significance of Carbon Removal in the Markets, brings together key leaders from the forefront of carbon removal innovation. And the panelists include Lizzie Aldrich, Vice President of Business Development at Anew, Joe Kochanski, Head of Operations in the Americas at Puro.earth, Simon Haldrup, CEO of Agreena, and Luke Shores from Capture 6. Let's go, President and co-founder. It's far away. Okay. So first, I'd like each of you to introduce just yourself and your organization, and we can go in order from far away from me. Lizzie.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Caroline. Lizzie Aldrich from Anew, and I've actually been in carbon markets all the way back since 2004. I did do my PhD research in early CDM markets, and I've been in it ever since. So I did work for a different carbon offset project developer and have been now with Anew for 6 years. And just a quick background, Anew is a carbon offset project developer in both compliance and voluntary markets. We have a big renewable fuels business within RNG, renewable natural gas, and work in RIN and LCFS markets in North America as well.
Hey everyone, Joe Kochanski here from Puro.earth, Head of Operations for the Americas office. I usually say that this is kind of a straight business development role. Most of the nuts and bolts of the registry operations and methodology development happen at our headquarters in Helsinki, Finland. But I've been working in sustainability since around 2010, working for a third-party social and environmental certification body that also does a lot of validation and verification work in carbon offset projects. And yeah, we have been around since 2019, sort of the original carbon removal standard and registry, just completely dedicated to that side of things. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Luke Shores. I'm a co-founder of Capture 6. Capture 6 is primarily a direct air capture company, but we also, as a byproduct of our process, produce fresh water and also use our alkaline outputs for ocean alkalinity enhancement.
Hi everyone, my name is Simon. I'm the weird European representation here. I think I'm CEO, co-founder of Agreena. We are a regenerative finance and technology player spanning all over Europe. What we essentially do is to help farmers transition to regenerative agriculture, and I'll come back a little bit to how that plays together with carbon markets later. We are operating in 20 countries across Europe at this point in time, and also dipping our feet here in the US, Canada, and Latin America.
Thank you. So the goal of this panel is to provide a comprehensive view of the opportunities and hurdles facing carbon removal in the carbon markets. And so we're very excited to hear your diverse insights and perspectives on scaling, on regulatory landscapes, on market demand, and on the technological advancements. And so the first topic I want to dig into is integrating carbon removal into the markets. Lizzie, as you just mentioned, Anew works in scaling climate solutions, including carbon removal projects. How does Anew integrate these carbon removal initiatives into the broader carbon market, and what trends are you seeing in terms of corporate demand?
Thanks, Caroline. So we have seen a trend towards more removals. Corporates are, since about 2021, 2022, requesting removals, and we actually were instrumental in helping bifurcate removals from forestry projects within the US and helping that essentially differentiation for verification and tagging of those removals on the American Carbon Registry. So this is a trend we've seen, but before we jump right into removals, I do want to say that we at Anew think both reductions and removals are essential. You know, the analogy of the overflowing bathtub, and what are you going to do first, turn the water off or start mopping it up, I think is really applicable here. Reductions, turning that water off is really essential. And so we do encourage clients to think about purchasing both, supporting both markets. But within the removals sector, we have removals from forestry projects. Our IFM portfolio creates both avoidance and removals as the trees grow over time. They're sequestering CO2. And then we also have removals from bioenergy, carbon capture and sequestration that will be available in 26. We have biochar opportunities and regenerative ag, where we're putting soil amendments onto the soil that draw down more CO2 out of the atmosphere than otherwise would occur. So within our portfolio, we've got a variety of different options, but we are seeing that trend towards removals, and it's certainly an interesting one, and we've scaled up to meet that. So we do have in the order of millions of removals available from our IFM portfolio. We provided 1 million spot removals to Microsoft this year alone.
Amazing. Actually, Simon, I'll ask you that Agreena focuses on soil-based carbon removal through carbon farming. How do you see agricultural carbon removal influencing this overall trend and the carbon markets? And what are the key challenges in integrating these nature-based solutions at scale?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a small step back, I think it's important, you know, carbon removals in agriculture is really what happens in the adoption of carbon farming principles, where farmers go from conventional practices of deep tillage, high use of nitrogen and chemicals of different kinds into more regenerative principles using cover crops, reduced tillage. We cover currently 17 different practices, so it's not one thing, but it ultimately results in reductions and removals into the soil through carbon sequestration. It's also important to say that it's not just about carbon removals, and I would like to use that opportunity to really hammer home that point. Carbon is hugely important, but it's about planetary boundaries. It is as much important for biodiversity. It is as important for water resilience. It is important for soil resilience, both through drought and through floods that is hitting our food ecosystem. So when we talk about carbon removals, it's basically the metric for representation of a much, much broader ecosystem service. Now, if we think about challenges, there are basically two sets of challenges. One relates to the carbon markets workings of its own, which is really about measurement and modeling. How do we verify each field, each farm is different. How do we do this at scale? It's about certification, and it's about the inner workings of the market. The second set of challenges is really about, and I personally think it's an even bigger challenge, is how do we make farmers change behavior? Because all of this, there's around 60 million farmers globally with more than 100 hectares that each have to adopt a new set of principles, a new knowledge barrier that has to be overcome. So it's not just about a financial barrier, it's really about knowledge communities. And therefore it's extremely important to position the carbon market as a predictable driver of helping farmers overcome that financial burden that is to transition. And do that at a scale that can really drive carbon removals on a massive scale. And I think, as importantly, with a technology availability that is right here now, it's not something we have to wait for.
Thank you. Luke, Capture 6 specializes in direct air capture. So it's very advanced technology, an approach to carbon removal. How do you see direct air capture integrating with the current carbon markets, and what are the key challenges to making these scale?
As someone who's developing DAC projects, I have it on faith that others will solve these carbon market challenges if we just deliver good projects. But I think, as everyone knows, a challenge here is these are fundamentally differentiated goods, and they all go under the nomenclature and rubric of tons of CO2, but, you know, beneath that label, there's so much heterogeneity, right? And so how can the markets reflect that these are different products in terms of their, you know, their permanence, their co-benefits, their reversibility characteristics? And so, you know, as a developer of projects, we sort of see it as our role to deliver good, you know, good projects and hope that, you know, at the moment, the fact that the voluntary markets haven't really enabled permanent carbon removal at this sort of price point that technologies like DAC need is not an imposition to us, but at some point you know, it will be at scale. And so the hope is that the many others that are working on this problem will kind of figure out how to make the market sort of correctly reflect the diverse nature of the removal activity that's taking place.
We all have to have faith. Well, Joe, Puro is known for building a registry in the CDR ecosystem and helping to build the whole ecosystem, in fact. Can you elaborate on how the ecosystem is influencing the carbon markets and helping companies access verified carbon removal credits of different types?
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of people, I guess buyers, perceive, from what I see, perceive durable carbon removal as being higher quality and what have you, more valuable, a higher price point, what have you. At the end of the day, we are not advocating for only durable carbon removal. That's what we focus on over here, but we're not opposed to any other carbon credit types, reductions, avoidances, short-term, long-term. There's a place for all of that stuff. But what we are trying to do is, at the end of the day, Oxford Net Zero is a kind of a guiding light for us. So sort of incrementally boosting the durability and what have you of these carbon removal certificates, or corks as we call them. And at the end of the day, while I do agree with the bathtub analogy and whatnot, yeah, so to, I guess, you know, speak to SBTI, for example, the billions of tons of CO2 that need to be removed by 2050 don't magically sort of materialize and appear in 2050. So building out this ecosystem now is super important, whether you're just kind of doing 1% of your spend, 2% of your spend on this kind of higher priced, more durable CDR.
It's actually a very good transition into the next topic that I want to discuss, which is ensuring quality, permanence, and credibility in carbon removal projects. Each of you had touched upon this, but Luke, you did just mention this, so I'm going to come back to you and ask. Technological solutions like DAC are often critiqued for cost and permanence. How does Capture 6 address these concerns, and what innovations are you exploring to ensure that reliability and long-term impact of carbon removed through your technology?
So that is the common criticism of DAC, is that it's too expensive. I think it's just first important to note that too expensive relative to what, you know, economists would certainly, some studies have said the social cost of carbon is $1,000 a ton. So when we say, you know, DAC is too expensive, partially this is a policy failure to recognize what is the actual social cost of carbon. But of course, being a, you know, pragmatist, it is important to reduce the cost of DAC. In our case, we do that through trying to deliver something else that has value. And so technically, we transform salt waste into a solvent, and that captures CO2, but in return, it also produces fresh water. So that fresh water is a second stream of revenue that effectively cross-subsidizes the cost of the direct air capture. In a future project, then the the alkaline output can be a third stream of revenue because that can be used for ocean alkalinity enhancement. So, one of the potential approaches, as we're all sort of believing in the S-curve to reduce the cost of these technologies over time, but in the short term, by producing co-benefits that have value, that can effectively drive down the price of the direct air capture.
Thank you. Lizzie, given the evolving regulatory landscape and increasing scrutiny on carbon credits, how does Anew ensure quality, permanence, and credibility of its carbon removal projects? What role do you see Anew playing in shaping the market standards?
Thanks, Caroline. Well, we have worked really hard. We've seen the criticisms, and we've worked really hard to address those. We have a new EPOC approach, which is a dynamic baseline for our forestry projects. We have 128 forestry projects in the US and Canada alone, so it's the largest part of our portfolio, so we've therefore put a lot of emphasis on this. And so using the ACR IFM version 2.1 methodology with a dynamic baseline, we are actually reassessing 5 different criteria every single verification of credits, looking at common silviculture practices around the project area, access for the timber to get to market, looking at the timber markets and capacity of the sawmills in the area, looking at the financial analysis of the stumpage prices in the area to see are the species on the property actually economically viable for harvesting in that given year. Any regulatory changes to buffer areas around streamside areas, all of that is now taken into account every single verification. And we're using satellite imagery that gets down to 0.5 meter resolution so that we can see individual trees and comparing the project territory to like landowners around us so that we can establish the accurate baseline every single year. For us, we verify our projects every single year for the first 7 to 8 years of the project life. So it's a huge improvement in accuracy. It also involves volume uncertainty for the landowner and a lot more analysis. And so there will be a price premium with these, but it is, in our mind, the very best we can do in terms of accuracy and rigor of crediting for forestry projects. We're really excited about that. The protocol was just live July 1st of this year, and we anticipate we'll have credits in about Q3 of next year because it takes so long to do the analysis. So that's one thing on the side of what we're doing to improve accuracy and rigor and respond to market criticism so that we can make sure that we stand behind every single credit that's issued. In terms of permanence, with forestry, we understand that there are risks, but I'd like to say ACR has a buffer pool that is permanent. And so the 18 to 22% of the credits that go into that buffer pool, depending on the site-specific factors and how risky it is, those stay in that buffer pool. And so that is a long-term maintained buffer pool indefinitely. And then if any harvesting occurs on that territory in the future, those are going to be from larger trees. It's going into long-lived wood products where that carbon is going to be stored for the long term. And within our property, we actually have opportunities with some of our landowners to offer long-term easements and multiple ACR crediting periods, which is something unique and unusual that we're able to offer. So we understand nature-based solutions may not have the permanence of direct air capture, but those trees are really the original direct air capture machinery. And at this point, in the $25 to $50 price range for removals from that technology, it is scalable and it is the most cost competitive option on the market for removals. So,
yeah. And it certainly is very cost competitive. Are you finding the increased price that comes with the improved sort of management and analysis? Are those being well received by buyers who have been in the market who are concerned about the scrutiny that the market is getting right now?
yeah, great question. So there is a cost increase. However, it still is much lower than the other types of removals that are available on the market at this time. It does increase over time, whereas I see direct air capture and other technological solutions probably decreasing in cost over time. However, it is still our most scalable and economic option, even with the premium that is assessed due to the dynamic baseline assessment.
Yeah. Simon, soil carbon sequestration is gaining traction, but it comes with challenges related to measurement and permanence. How does Agreena work with farmers and scientists to ensure that soil carbon credits are reliable and robust, and what improvements do you think are needed in this area?
Yeah, I'll take a step back first. I was a chief risk officer in a large bank at some point, and we discerned between a retail portfolio and a corporate portfolio because you had concentration risks. It's no different when it comes to non-permanence risks in carbon credit portfolios. We work with farmers currently we are somewhere between 5 and 10 million acres of land being adopted to regenerative farming across 20 different countries. That means we have a huge diversification. So actually the main drivers of reversals is being significantly diversified across that portfolio. Therefore, when we talk about non-permanence, it comes down to two factors. It comes down to really, first and foremost, understand what it actually means for a farmer to transition. Because I would discern a little bit between the transactional system where subsidies are given 1 year to cover crops and the next year to energy crops and a third year to reduce tillage, and farmers change their practices accordingly. That is not suitable for carbon crediting. It needs to be a holistic approach, and it all starts at the beginning. So we are onboarding every single farmer. We're in it with them on the journey. We're establishing a scrutiny on the baseline on a field level, not on a farm level, on a field level from the get-go that is being modeled and measured every single year in our verification. Of course, it's a lot of technology that goes into this. We can see the specific soil disturbance happening from our AI on satellite imagery. We can see all the crops, all the different practices being deployed. But then I would also go big picture and say, what actually does, because simply put, the biggest problem is farmers go back. If they go back and start tilling their soil, because then the soil is unstable and then it's being released up in the atmosphere and mineralized to the atmosphere again. So we have to ask ourselves the question, what does make farmers go back? And it's typically in the first year or two where they're testing it out, and therefore we have additional, apart from the buffer pools on the registry level, we have additional premium pools to ensure that we, even for initial issuances, can hold permanence. But once they're over that hurdle of 1 or 2 years, they're starting to really see both the financial and physical benefits of transitioning. And then they're selling the plow. They're never going back. And therefore, if I were to be a little bit direct, I would also say it's sometimes a little bit theoretical. Next time we talk about soil carbon, I think, visit your farmer first, and then let's have the discussion.
You'll have to bring a farmer with you next time.
We have plenty of. It's always fantastic when we bring farmers.
Yes, I agree with that for all different types of the folks on the ground at projects. Joe, Puro.earth focuses on verifying carbon removal projects for quality and permanence. What innovative methodologies or verification processes are you excited about that could help enhance the reliability and credibility of carbon removal credits in the market?
So yeah, when we started out, we really were kind of outsiders to the carbon market, I would say, Puro generally. What has helped us kind of move along in terms of quality, I would say, is ICROA, specifically the ICBCM being very prescriptive, Corsia, and just other guiding sort of elements from the Department of Energy and Frontier. So that's kind of where we're coming from on the quality side. We just want to have every different accreditation that we possibly can so that people know that this ton is a ton, it's additional, high quality, meeting the right permanence or durability to a minimum of 100 years, or in some cases 1,000 years, depending on the methodology. As far as the innovations that we're seeing, we're sort of moving in the direction of ocean-based storage. So whether that be terrestrial storage or sort of terrestrial biomass stored in the ocean environment, eventually ocean alkalinity enhancement would be interesting, and we hope to get there. We have recently signed on aquatic, so they have kind of a very interesting approach as well that looks very cost effective and having hydrogen as a byproduct. So anytime where you can get those sort of a utilization component or some sort of co-benefit in addition to the CDR, which I think generally speaking engineered carbon removal doesn't get enough credit for, but things like biochar really does have some nice co-benefits for communities and agricultural benefits and so on. So yeah, that would be the main things.
Thanks, Joe. So I want to talk a bit more about policy, collaboration, and innovation. Lizzie, I'll turn this back to you. As we think about scaling carbon removal solutions, what policy changes or industry collaborations do you believe are critical for accelerating the deployment of these projects? How is Anew engaging with policymakers and other stakeholders to drive this forward?
So at Anew, we do have a policy team that is working not only with state, federal legislation that's in the making, but also the voluntary initiatives like ICVCM and VCMI that are approaching the labeling of high quality offsets, as well as claims that can be made by corporates when they do purchase those offsets or removals. I will say what the market needs from Anew's perspective is certainty for buyers, safe harbor for buyers so that they can go and procure removals, offsets, in a long-term agreement and know that they're not going to be criticized for that action, but they're actually going to be rewarded for it. And I know that there are initiatives underway for the labeling of credits with CCP labels, and VCMI is working towards the claims code of practice with silver, gold, and platinum claims that can be made by corporates. We really need that, and we need those corporates to buy into that infrastructure. Right now, there's certain initiatives like SBTI where we're seeing large corporates with significant emissions dropping out because they're seeing it as not attainable. And so I think there needs to be a recognition that these instruments outside of the boundaries of a particular company's emissions need to be fungible, at least in the short term, at a minimum, to help these companies stay on board with their targets and do something and not just sit on the sidelines and say, hey, we'll be net zero in 2050, and really use that to defer any action right now. So on the demand side, we need that safe harbor for buyers. And on the supply side, we need to make sure that anything that's done in the offset or removal realm is actually cost competitive. So in the timber industry, what that translates into is, are the carbon prices competitive with pulp and paper markets, with long-lived wood product markets? And if so, that's going to make that industrial timberland owner really think about the value of the asset on the land and utilizing that asset for carbon markets rather than liquidating the asset when available for pulp, paper, or long-term wood products. And we, at current prices in certain parts of the country right now, pulp and paper prices are actually being rivaled by carbon. We're not quite there with long-lived wood products, but it is actually happening. So we need that stable price to remain. We need it to even go up in order to rival it in the timber industry. And for all other categories of offsets and removals, I'd say we need that as well. We need that price certainty so that we can actually pursue those alternatives and commercialize them, scale them up so that that price is actually competitive and people begin to think twice about what they have in their asset on their land.
Simon, in Europe, where Agreena is actively involved, does what Lizzie just said resonate, and what policy or regulatory developments and frameworks do you believe will have the most significant impact in scaling agricultural carbon removal solutions?
Yeah, there's a few different dimensions. Now I speak a little bit first and foremost from a European perspective, but I think it resonates as we're looking broader into different policy development. In EU, we've seen over a very short period of time the CRCF framework coming together. Now there was an election to get over before it started scaling further, the carbon removal and carbon farming framework that really looks to build also a regulatory framework around what constitute removals in this aspect, and really also being a potential introduction to at some point, compliance market around this. The other thing I would highlight, also maybe looking into a little bit how the partnerships in this. We're currently working across, say, less than 1% of European agricultural land. So even though we feel we've come a long way, we're merely scratching the surface. And therefore, it's almost a pre-competitive setup where, with a lot of partnerships going on in order to unlock some of these big technology hurdles that has to be overcome for some of the challenges we talked about before in measurement and management verification. The last piece is quite interesting, is also there's a confluence here between different markets. The carbon removal market is not a standalone. It actually plays together with the agricultural market. So we're seeing scope 3 reductions and commitments coming in. All the CPGs, all the food companies need to reduce their scope 3 emissions significantly, and more than 70% of that sits behind the farm gate. And therefore, the ability to create interoperability between carbon removal markets, scope 3, and supply chain intervention initiatives, also financing. So a lot of banks, we just did a partnership with World Bank last week in order to ensure availability of green financing to farmers as they adopt this. I would say rarely can carbon in the nature space, can carbon removal markets stand alone. It's really the ability to create interoperability between different markets, but through the same measurement and management systems.
Thank you. And you talked about partnerships, which is a big theme here. Luke, for a technology-driven company like Capture6, partnerships, I would imagine, are key to scaling impact. What collaborations do you think are most critical to advancing direct air capture, and how are you working with governments, investors, corporates to accelerate the adoption of your technology?
Yeah, I was just reflecting that when we started this company 3 years ago, we've always had basically the same approach, but producing water as a co-benefit to CDR was actually, I think it was sort of viewed negatively initially, and that was because it raised this question of financial additionality. Like if theoretically water revenues could make this plant functional, what was the role of CDR? Which was kind of, in some ways, in hindsight, that was kind of an academic preoccupation because we're so far from that being a real, problem. But, fast forward to today, if you look at the 2024 Frontier Climate pre-purchases, all 9 of the groups that were selected have some sort of co-benefit. And so none of those groups are doing purely DAC or CDR without some other source of potential revenue. And I think that's, I guess, an evolution in the way that buyers are thinking about the need to scale technical carbon removal by, in part, bringing in some sort of other revenue stream. I think another important thing that groups like ours, but also a number of others are doing is they're finding, natural local counterparts. So there is no, local government head of carbon, right, in any jurisdiction in the world, so far as I'm aware of. But there is a, municipal water authority almost everywhere, right? So in our case, because we work with municipal water authorities, that provides a community-based, group or a local government that becomes the kind of natural interlocutor for who we're trying to do this with. And so if CDR is a global public good, there still needs to be some sort of a local counterpart. And so I think in sort of what Frontier and Climate is doing is sort of seeing that this needs to be mainstreamed with all sorts of industrial projects. So every new cement factory needs to figure out how to bring in CDR, DAC, decarbonization, every new steel factory, every new airport. And then, if that can be done in mainstream, then as those projects, industries, economies, grow, then decarbonization grows with it, as opposed to this kind of, isolated effort that's standalone. So I sort of see it in the kind of mainstreaming that these technologies and approaches scale.
Which is similar almost to working with farmers, right? In a different way, in a different technological scale, but it's similar in that these have to become mainstream practice. Yeah, the mainstream systems. Joe, with the increasing corporate commitment to net zero targets, what role do you see Puro.earth playing in facilitating collaborations between carbon removal providers and companies looking to purchase high quality credits? Are there particular partnerships that have been especially effective?
Yeah, so when Puro started out, there was really actually no place to buy carbon removal credits of any type. So at that point in time, we did have a marketplace. We were very engaged with corporate buyers, had some really good success with Microsoft and the like early on. When we ultimately went through the ICRO process, that was where we had to sort of cut the marketplace and focus entirely on the standard and registry. So that has been a really good move for our credibility and integrity in the market. We still see ourselves as definitely ecosystem builders and facilitators. So when corporates have questions about our different methodologies or where they can find quirks, we're happy to answer those, provide a list, receive information from them on what their particular needs and wants are. That's a pretty regular occurrence. There are plenty of partnerships as well that once we drop the marketplace, just linking up with companies like Patch and Watershed and so on, that can help facilitate those transactions. Finally, I would say the NASDAQ connection. So they invested in Puro, majority shareholder, probably about 3 years ago now. And so that has been super helpful, just working with them closely, sort of educating them, making sure to get the word out there with different corporate buyers, hundreds, if not thousands, of which are not super familiar with carbon credits, carbon markets. Some have strategies, some don't. And so, yeah, just working closely with NASDAQ. And of course, even organizations like Flowcarbon, we have great relationships with. So the partnerships, we're trying to build partnerships at every different corner of the ecosystem to make sure that we can bring everybody together and sort of come up with solutions together.
Yeah, and we're actively working on partnerships across this panel and across the market. So we're big believers in that. With the very limited time we have left, I'm curious from each of you on a forward-looking view on some of the short-term things coming up, maybe it's elections in the US or other policy frameworks that might, what you're looking at and what would have the most impact on the work that you do. We could just go down the row, or anybody who has a thought can jump in on this one.
Yeah, my new gig is Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has the largest concentration of terrestrial agriculture in the world. So building Article 6 markets for farmers in Kazakhstan, more or less as a proof point to how I think carbon markets can also evolve in the regulatory space.
Okay, wasn't expecting Kazakhstan.
That's a tough question. We are pursuing projects now in South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and it's certainly interesting to think, obviously, to hit, net zero targets for the world, this needs to happen in many different places. And so as a developer, we think about, well, what is that unique pathway in each country? So for instance, in South Korea, there is an ETS. The price within the ETS is much lower than in the EU. So, that doesn't necessarily work for us at the moment for a large-scale project. But there is a need to basically think creatively across these different domains because the policy environments are very different. I did have a conversation with the climate change commissioner in New Zealand a couple years ago, and I was struck in that he was basically saying it's hard to think about buying carbon removal. I'm poorly paraphrasing here. Because there was going to be such expenses required for climate adaptation and resilience and for emissions reductions, and that made me think this is really being seen by policymakers in this sort of zero-sum framework, that you have a certain amount of money that you allocate across these three different dimensions. And so how do we actually make projects that are synergistic across emissions reduction, removal, and climate resilience? And in that way, we can be sort of more nimble and sort of utilizing whatever policy frameworks exist in a given location.
Thank you.
I'll keep it super brief because I think we ought to close this down pretty soon. But I'll just say I'm working with the Department of Energy on a regular basis. I went down to a conference in Mexico recently. A lot of the state governments are doing some really nice stuff there. In a few weeks, I'll be meeting with some representatives in Alberta, trying to figure out decarbonization in Canada. And then our head of policy, Helen Bray, is connected, I think, to everybody who is driving things forward in terms of policy and things like that. Daniel Sierra, our compliance director in DC, is getting in the mix with a lot of different America's policy stuff. So really positive movement from what I can see.
Great.
I think with the election coming up, regardless of the outcome, we're moving forward. We've acquired 1.7 million acres in a $1.8 billion transaction. We now own that land through a joint venture with Aurora Sustainable Lands. So we are moving forward. We are not waiting for any kind of policy direction or clarification among voluntary guidelines, because we know we need these solutions now. I do think that even if an administration comes in play that rolls back climate regulation or doesn't pursue any kind of binding federal legislation, sometimes we see, as we did in 2016, that corporates actually step up and take more action because of that. And so I do think that regardless of the outcome of the federal election this fall, we are going to see corporates continue to play more and more of an important role in making actions towards climate mitigation, because the effects are all around us. We're seeing it, we're feeling it. It's not going away, regardless of the politics. So,
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. Our wonderful panelists are available. We're over time, so we don't have time for a Q&A, but they will be available after. And thank you all.